Today we have a very recent story to share with you, one that explores the boundaries between life and death, reality and the afterlife. Lewis experienced a near death experience and witnessed the imminent future of humanity regarding the conflict occurring right now as we live our lives. At the end of the story, Luis will answer some new questions we have prepared for him to further delve into his experience and the message of hope he carries with him. Let's prepare to listen to a testimony that not only touches the heart, but also carries a message to be spread before it's too late. Enjoy listening.
I have worked for 25 years as a foreman on a major construction project. That day, the sun was shining high, and the noise of jackhammers and cranes filled the air. I was used to this racket, a kind of soundtrack to my working life. As I walked on the scaffolding, checking my men's work, I felt proud of our progress. I never imagined that day would change everything. As I watched a group of workers secure a large steel beam, a screeching noise caught me by surprise. I turned just in time to see the beam detach from its position. I didn't even have time to react. I felt a devastating impact. Then the world went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer at the construction site. I found myself in an indescribable place, enveloped by a warm and embracing light. I felt a profound peace, something I had never experienced before. Looking around, I realized I was no longer in my body. I felt light, free from earthly pains and worries. As I tried to understand where I was, a figure approached. It was a man with a serene appearance, with eyes radiating infinite wisdom. I immediately knew who he was: Jesus. His presence radiated love and understanding. He welcomed me with a smile that seemed to penetrate directly into my soul. "Welcome," he said with a gentle and reassuring voice. "Do not fear. You are safe here." I was speechless. I felt a flood of emotions overwhelm me. "Jesus," I whispered, "why am I here?" "The accident brought you to this point," he replied. "But there is something I must show you." Jesus took my hand, and in an instant, we found ourselves in a different place. Before us stretched a terrible vision: destroyed cities, buildings reduced to rubble, smoke and flames everywhere. I could hear the cries and screams of desperate people. My heart tightened. "This is a vision of the future," Jesus explained. "A third world war that will bring devastation and suffering to millions of people." I saw images of soldiers fighting, civilians fleeing for shelter, children separated from their families. Each scene was more heartbreaking than the last. Jesus showed me cities I knew, reduced to ruins, and people I loved in despair. "Why are you showing me all this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because you have a mission," Jesus replied. "You must return to earth and warn humanity. There is still time to avoid this catastrophe, but only if people change their hearts and actions." The images continued to flow, and I saw the causes of the war: the conflicts between nations, the arms race, the lack of dialogue and understanding. I also saw the current issues in Ukraine and Russia: images of soldiers on battlefields, besieged cities, broken families, the growing tension between superpowers, and the fear of a nuclear escalation. "This war is not inevitable," Jesus continued, "but it requires a profound change. People must embrace peace, understanding, and mutual love." His words resonated within me. I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility he was entrusting to me. "How can I do all this?" I asked, feeling small in the face of the greatness of the mission. "You will not be alone," Jesus said. "I will be with you, and there will be others ready to support you. But you must be brave and determined. The future of humanity depends on the actions of each one of us." Then the vision changed. I found myself back at the construction site, but this time as a spectator. I saw myself under the steel beam, unconscious. The workers were running toward me, calling for help. I saw the ambulance arrive and the paramedics working frantically to save me. "You must return," Jesus said. "Your time here is not yet over." I felt one last wave of peace and love envelop me. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. The pain was intense, but the memory of what I had seen and felt was even stronger. I knew I could not ignore that vision. I had a mission to accomplish. The following days were a trial of physical pain and rehabilitation, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the images of that terrible war and remembered Jesus' words. I could not allow it to happen. As soon as I was able to move, I started talking to anyone who would listen. I told them about my experience, the vision, and the message of peace that had been entrusted to me. I encountered skepticism and disbelief, but also people ready to listen and do their part to change things. The world will not change overnight. Tensions and conflicts continued, but I also saw signs of hope. More and more people began to understand the importance of peace and to work actively for it. The voices calling for dialogue and understanding became louder, and I hope that by sharing this experience with as many people as possible, we can raise even more awareness on this issue. With Jesus' help, I am truly hopeful that my vision will never come true.
Now let's hear the answers to the questions we asked Luis. Can you describe what you felt at the exact moment of the accident? What was it like to transition from earthly reality to that place of light?
When the beam hit me, everything happened in an instant. I felt a sharp pain and then total darkness. There was no time to think or be afraid. Suddenly, I found myself in a place of intense light. It was like being enveloped by comforting warmth, a feeling of absolute peace. The transition was so rapid that I didn't even have time to understand what was happening. It was as if pain and confusion were immediately replaced by a deep calm.
How did you immediately recognize Jesus? And what was your first reaction upon seeing him?
When I saw Jesus, there was no doubt about who he was. It was as if his presence emanated an instinctive recognition. His eyes, full of compassion and wisdom, looked at me as if they knew every part of me. My first reaction was awe and reverence. I was overwhelmed by a sense of peace and unconditional love. I could only stand there contemplating his presence and feeling a deep gratitude for that moment.
Which specific details of the vision of the Third World War struck you the most, and why?
The vision was extremely detailed and frightening. The images of cities in flames, buildings reduced to rubble, were vivid and devastating. But what struck me the most were the people. Seeing children crying, desperate families, soldiers fighting without hope was heartbreaking. The expressions on the faces of those suffering were what left an indelible mark on me. They were images of a broken humanity, a silent cry for help that resonated deep within my soul.
Thank you for listening to Luis's extraordinary story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next incredible testimonies and stories of hope. Together we can spread the message of peace and make a difference. In life, we all go through days when we are afflicted by headaches so intense that they make even the simplest activities difficult. However, imagine having to face these pains 2 or 3 times a month for years without ever finding relief. Today, I will tell you the touching story of Evelyn, a young girl who struggled against these persistent sufferings and risked the most extreme gesture. Before we begin, I want to sincerely thank my community for the constant support and messages of encouragement they have given me during this time. Your positivity fills me with joy and gives me the strength to continue my work. Without further ado, let's start the narrative. Happy listening. I was 23 years old, and that month I suffered from daily headaches in addition to about 5 severe and debilitating migraines. That's why I simply stopped caring about life, with no desire to live, and didn't hesitate to take a combination of antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills mixed with vodka. I wasn't literally trying to commit suicide, but I think I was unconsciously open enough to the idea in case of a physical breakdown. I felt more than willing to go through with it. I was physically exhausted and suffered from 1 or 2 migraines a month and headaches every day for almost a year. Basically, I felt that at such a young age my life was over and this kind of suffering was unbearable and intolerable without any hope. So, my best friend, who lived with me and my mother, was by my bedside all the time. She witnessed, she later told me, that I had stopped breathing and my mother had called an ambulance that took me to the hospital for a gastric lavage. Here's the main part of my experience. I was lying on the bed and the effects of the pills with vodka were definitely making me drowsy. At first, I thought I was just falling asleep until I noticed the most distinct and strange sensations in my chest and lungs. I felt like my heart was beating irregularly or with a bizarre series of beats in my chest. Then I remember feeling like my body was, in a way, communicating to me that this was the end. It was happening. I was about to die. I remember actually reacting with a feeling of relief and that, selfishly, any attachment to my parents, whom I loved and love very much, and to this world, this life, my friends, myself, was not something I wanted to be part of anymore. I was willing to let go of everything to escape the torment of my body. It was as if my complete peace with the idea of death helped my body to surrender, not to resist the process. I was totally and absolutely at peace, and in fact so satisfied with this concept. I felt a kind of floating sensation and began to see in a different way, my body on the bed and my friend crying frantically. For a brief moment I felt sorry for my body, as if it were an old friend I had empathy for, but I had finished with it and wanted to move on without it. When that fleeting moment passed, I felt like I was instantly plunged into darkness. I call it a boiling darkness that moved very slowly within, somewhat like being inside the center of a slowly moving black tornado or a funnel-like atmosphere. My next memory seems different from the usual, but this is the best way to describe it. At first, I noticed that I was wondering, what am I? Then I think I answered myself, almost nonchalantly, "Oh, I am me." I felt emotionally neutral. I had no thoughts about my family, my parents, or anyone else. In fact, I felt nothing but simple peace and contentment without really thinking about anything. I had no body. I couldn't see myself. Then, for a subsequent moment, everything happened rapidly. There was a new presence, but it was a petty and angry presence, like something monstrous but invisible to me. I felt it approaching, and it scared me immensely. I felt like it wanted to devour me. Then I felt powerless. I didn't even know what it was, but immediately began asking for Jesus Christ. In the span of a millisecond, I perceived a tiny light that was exponentially growing larger and faster, heading towards me, or perhaps I was heading towards it, as it pulled me away from the unsettling presence of the boiling darkness. I felt surrounded not only by total light, not the same type of light on earth, but a spiritual brightness, and by the most incredible, beautiful, wise, loving, and nurturing presence that initially enveloped me to soothe me. I particularly remember that it knew me, and I knew it instantly. It was as if that being had known me all my life, better than my family or even myself. I knew I could trust it and felt saved. I knew it cared about me. The presence had no face, but it was like an entity of feelings, of love and goodness. Immense goodness, a kind of goodness beyond the world. I immediately felt like a child metaphorically kneeling at its feet, even though it had no body or gender. After it comforted me, I felt all the feelings I had ever felt in my life and all the feelings of others in my life. It was like a giant sphere of energy moving through me. I remember having this sort of epiphany where I saw all my weaknesses and strengths. Suddenly, everything made sense. I was enjoying that knowledge, but I couldn't hold on to it. I clung completely to this good presence like a child would cling to a mother. I remember feeling like a tiny droplet of spirit, clinging to this incredible being of goodness and sinking into it with the greatest relief and joy. There was no pain, no sadness, no stress. It filled every hole in my soul. Within this goodness, I felt complete but dependent on it. Then it began to communicate with me as thoughts were instant back and forth between us. Gently and gently, I began to argue and beg it to let me stay. I absolutely refused to leave its presence, insisting that I was finally happy, and continued to beg to stay. It said, "You are not ready yet. You have to go back." It conveyed these messages very, very gently, with tenderness and love, once again like a parent reassuring a small child. I reluctantly accepted, and a part of me felt surprised to be there in the first place, and I felt it saw me as an undeveloped soul that needed to grow more before staying. For whatever reason, I wasn't given a choice. I remember it communicated to me that it loved me and cared for me, but that I hadn't finished yet. I was gently sent back into the midst of darkness for a tiny fraction of a second. At the highest speed you could ever imagine, I was thrust back into my body and felt almost as if there was a loud, metallic sound. I opened my eyes and saw my mother and my best friend crying and panicking. Shortly after, an ambulance arrived. I was partly happy to have just had that experience and partly frustrated to be back in my body. Since that day, my headaches and migraines have almost completely disappeared, although I still have them occasionally. From that day on, when I am close to any human being, I feel like a human antenna with an emotional radar to the millionth degree. I feel like I have sometimes perceived the presence of evil beings on some occasions. One night I saw the outline of a presence in the darkness, but it disappeared as soon as I became distressed upon noticing it. Ting-ta, it was still a beautiful presence, which seemed to appear and disappear quickly after I cried for my life. I think it was an angel, but it had no face or wings. I believe that both good and evil attract evil or good energies, spirits, whatever you want to call them. And when people get angry, it invites more evil. At least that's what I feel like I've learned in general. I also feel that goodness is often met with vicious energy, trying to destroy it or lead it astray. Maybe it sounds strange, but I truly believe that all this time on earth we are surrounded by all kinds of spirits that are simply invisible to us. I think I met Jesus that day. It was a beautiful day that I appreciate and rely on to get through difficult times. It reminds us that this life is truly temporary, and for some reason it helps us shape different kinds of souls. That's my experience. I hope it helps someone. Before I leave you, I wanted to ask for a personal reflection on this story. Have you ever experienced situations similar to those described in the story? If you are going through the pain of losing someone very important and feel a void in your heart, then this video is just for you. It's a blend of emotions and hope that will help you fill the void left by that person. Take a moment to relax and get comfortable. I'm Charlotte, and I invite you to subscribe to the channel so we can meet here again tomorrow. If you decide to make me your daily routine, even your soul will be uplifted. Let's start right away. Happy listening. Reflecting on my life, I realize that I haven't had a particularly happy existence. After finishing high school, I started suffering from depression and spent a lot of time in therapy, trying to cope with my emotional difficulties. It wasn't an easy period, but I tried to move forward as best as I could. At the age of 30, however, my life was shattered by the loss of my brother. He was involved with a criminal gang. I never knew exactly what he did, but it was evident that he dealt drugs and frequented dangerous, disreputable places. When he and his friends were around, people were afraid. One day, our worst nightmare came true. They found my brother on a park bench, dead from an overdose. The news hit us like a bolt from the blue. We were very close before he joined that group. We had shared many happy and carefree moments during our childhood, and I couldn't reconcile the image of that boy with the reality of his tragic death. For my parents, this tragedy has been devastating. Even today, it's not easy for them to move forward. Every day is a struggle to accept reality and find a reason to smile. Losing a child is an indescribable pain, and seeing my parents suffer so much has made it even harder for me to find the strength to face my own sadness. On my psychologist's advice, I started a small job near where I lived. I worked at a combo convenience store gas station in one of the rougher parts of my city and was just finishing up my shift. Since I worked the closing shift, it was my job to set the alarms and lock up. Normally, there would always be 2 people working this shift for obvious safety reasons, but that night, the other person working with me had gotten sick. Not expecting any trouble, I sent him home. It was about 10 minutes before the store closed, and I was rushing around making sure everything for the night had been completed. After mentally going over the final checklist, I only had to wait a few more minutes before I could lock the doors and cash out the register. Those few minutes never came for me. A man entered and asked me for a pack of cigarettes. When I turned my back to get them, everything went black. Security footage later told the rest of the story. I had been hit in the back of the head by the guy who had a roll of dimes tucked inside his fist. The guy then jumped the counter and kicked me again in the head before opening the register, grabbing the cash, and making his escape. The tapes also showed that I had lain there unconscious for the next 12 minutes before a random person pulled up to the gas pumps, got out of her car, and walked inside to pay, not realizing we should have already been closed. Seeing me lying there, she first tried to wake me before calling 911. The police arrived next and secured the scene, with an ambulance arriving just a minute later. While I was being rushed to the hospital, the police contacted the store owner to secure the video footage and interviewed the woman who had called them. At the hospital, I was taken to the ICU and hooked up to machines that monitored my vitals and alerted the nurses' station if a problem developed. The attending physician told my mother and father that I was in a coma and that they could stay or go home, and the doctors would call them if anything changed. They both opted to stay. As for me, I might have been physically lying in a hospital bed, but my soul had entirely left my body. At first it was scary. I could look down and see myself. But worst of all, I could see my mother crying and had no way to tell her that I was still there. I soon discovered I could easily pass through walls, So I left the room and walked past the nurse's station and into another hallway, where I saw my boss, who had arrived by then, talking to my dad about what the doctors had said. As I was going back to the room, I saw an elderly woman. What's more, she saw me. "There you are," she stated. I was caught off guard by this and quickly looked around to be sure she was talking to me. Seeing no one else in the hallway, I asked, "You can see me?" "Of course I can. Now come on, let's go." "Go where?" I asked. "Just come on," she answered. There was no tunnel and no bright lights. I did not encounter angels or Jesus or even God. Suddenly, we were no longer in the hospital, but instead had traveled in the blink of an eye to a park. It resembled every other park you've ever seen. There were people walking dogs, people running, kids playing on swings and slides. And then I saw him. The person I saw was my older brother. He was sitting at a picnic table with a chessboard ready. I guess I should mention that chess was our game. He taught me how to play, and although I never could beat him, we played every day until he died. "Is that really you, Maximo?" I asked. "Who else would I be?" he replied. As I sat down across from him, 1,000 questions rushed through my mind at once, but before I could ask any, he simply glanced at the chess set and made his first move. We sat there and played game after game for what seemed like days until I finally won. This was the first time I had ever beaten him in anything, so I jumped up and did a happy dance. Laughing at me, he said, "Act like you've been here before, little brother." The rush of questions returned, and just as I was about to start asking, Maximo looked at me and said, "Tell Mom I'm okay and that I'm sorry for the pain I caused her." Those were the last words he uttered to me, because in the next instant I was waking up in the hospital. Nurses and then doctors came into my room. My mother and father had to be called as they had gone home to take showers and return. In all, I had been in a coma for 3 days. My boss came to visit me in the hospital, and I resigned at my parents' request. In the 5 years since that night, I attended culinary school and graduated. Oh, and the guy who robbed the store that night? He was caught, arrested, and convicted. As far as I know, he is still in prison, since it wasn't his first felony. The first story has come to an end, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now, I will leave you with an incredible story where Mark, the protagonist, meets someone who passed away years ago and reveals startling details. Please note that the date range of the experience is given approximately because I am uncertain of the times or dates, as I was not physically aware for those 3 days. Those were the days I was unconscious from the accident. I am told that I was dead on the operating room table for 3 minutes during the brain surgery I was having to correct life-threatening damage to my head. During this time, I wasn't aware of what had become of my physical body until I awoke to the real world again. I saw the light. I followed it. People say, don't follow the light, but you really don't have a choice. It's either follow the light or be stuck there until you wake up, if you do. So I followed. I emerged somewhere outside the gates of heaven. I walked up to the nearest seraph and didn't even get past stating my full name when the seraph simply smiled and said, "Follow me. He wishes to speak with you." So I did. We walked in through the gates, and I was led straight to the chamber where the Lord sat. I seated myself across a desk from him, and we began conversing. The desk was completely clear. To this day, I cannot completely remember all that I talked with him about, but I get a sense that it was a long conversation, one as if between friends. I do remember some parts of it, however, mainly that he told me directly that I would not remember much of what we talked about. What I do remember is from the middle of the conversation. Keep in mind that at this point, I did not know my father had passed on in the accident that we had just been in. We had been on our way to go out to eat, as we always did, and he had been driving. I remember that the Lord said to me, "Worry not, you will not be kept here. I do not wish to have you home yet, for you have much to live for." This was in response to my question, "Am I really dead to my life down there?" The Lord then smiled, and my dad walked in, grinning as he went to stand by the Lord's side. It was his usual mischievous, surprise-bearing smile. It also had a large amount of pride in it. My dad simply said, "I'm home," to which I replied, "Daniel will miss you, and so will I." Daniel, who was 17 at the time of the accident, is my younger brother. My dad simply said, "Take care of him while you still can." I said that, of course, I would. The Lord then spoke and said, "Your father spoke to me earlier and did not wish you to die." I granted his wish. I conversed more with the Lord and my father. This portion isn't something I can remember, but I get the hazy sense that it was just as if we were talking things over, and that they were both consoling me. My memory picks back up at the point where I expressed my anxiety at returning to life. I think I said, "Well, I'd like to get back down and check on Daniel," and I gave my father and the Lord a parting hug. I still remember the hugs well, for when I gave the Lord a hug, he whispered into my ear as I was transported back, "You will not remember everything we spoke about, but don't worry. You'll remember what you need to know in life when the time is right. And you will remember it all when you cross heaven's threshold once again." My name is John, and this is my story. A story I never imagined I would live through, and one that profoundly changed my perception of life and the future. It was a cold winter morning, one of those days when the air is sharp and the world seems wrapped in a muffled silence. I was on I-95, one of the busiest highways in America, heading to work as usual. The road was slippery due to the ice, and as I drove, my mind wandered between thoughts of projects and deadlines. I had just passed a truck when my car suddenly lost traction. In a few seconds, which seemed to last an eternity, I lost control of the vehicle. The deafening sound of twisting metal and shattering glass enveloped me in terrible chaos. I desperately tried to regain control, but it was all in vain. My heart pounded furiously as my car spun around, crashing into the guardrail. A violent impact, then silence. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a surreal situation. I was outside my body, floating above the scene of the accident. I could see the rescuers frantically working around my body, desperately trying to revive me. I heard the sirens of the ambulances, the confused noise of worried voices, and yet I felt incredibly calm, enveloped by a peace I had never known before. A bright light began to surround me, warm and welcoming, gently pulling me away from the accident scene. I felt an indescribable force lifting me, carrying me through a tunnel of light that seemed endless. It was a timeless journey to a place where the concept of past, present, and future dissolved. At the end of the tunnel, I emerged into a space of pure light, radiant with love and compassion. In front of me stood a luminous figure, emanating an aura of infinite serenity. I instinctively knew who it was: Jesus. His gaze was full of understanding and love, and I felt welcomed like never before. "Welcome, John," he said in a voice that resonated like celestial music. "You have gone through a great trial, and now I will show you something very important." With a gesture of his hand, the landscape around us changed. Suddenly, we were in a futuristic city, like nothing I could have imagined. Towering skyscrapers rose into the sky, covered with lush gardens and vertical farms. The streets were filled with silent, pollution-free vehicles that floated lightly in the air. "This is a vision of the future, John," Jesus explained. "A possible future if humanity chooses the right path." His gaze grew serious. "Artificial intelligence, which you see used here so harmoniously, is one of the keys to reaching this future. But it is also a double-edged sword. If used poorly, it can lead to catastrophic consequences. It is crucial that humanity learns to use it wisely and responsibly." I felt the weight of his words, their importance. I knew that what I was seeing was not just a dream, but a mission being entrusted to me. I had to return and do my part to ensure that this future became a reality and that the pitfalls of artificial intelligence were managed with the utmost care. Jesus took my hand, and together we rose above that futuristic city. Looking down, I could see the vertical cities, immense towers rising into the sky, each with lush gardens and agricultural fields on every floor. The facades of the skyscrapers were covered with advanced solar panels, capturing the sun's energy with extraordinary efficiency. "This is one of the key innovations of the future," Jesus explained. "Vertical cities reduce the environmental impact of urbanization, using space more efficiently and sustainably." Walking along the streets, I noticed that people seemed serene and satisfied. Every building was a self-sufficient microcosm, with spaces for living, working, and growing food. Children played in parks suspended between the skyscrapers, while adults worked in offices equipped with the most advanced technologies. Jesus then led me to a large energy control center. The walls were covered with screens showing real-time data on energy production and consumption. Here, energy was generated through completely renewable sources. Advanced solar panels and wind turbines powered the city, while safe and stable nuclear fusion plants provided a continuous energy source. "There is no longer a need for fossil fuels," Jesus said. "Humanity has learned to harness natural resources intelligently and sustainably." The air is clean, and the global climate is slowly returning to balance. As we moved through the city, I saw flying cars moving silently above the streets, without causing pollution. People used magnetic levitation vehicles to travel quickly from one place to another, connecting cities and continents in just a few hours. "These advanced transportation systems have revolutionized the way we live and work," Jesus explained. "Long and tiring journeys have become a thing of the past, allowing for greater interaction and global collaboration." Jesus then took me to a futuristic hospital. The interior was bright and welcoming, and everywhere I saw advanced devices monitoring patients in real time. Doctors use nanorobots to treat diseases at the cellular level, repairing damaged tissues and eliminating viruses and bacteria from within the body. "Medicine has made great strides," Jesus said. "Diseases that were once incurable are now easily treatable. Life expectancy has increased significantly, and people can live longer and healthier lives." As we continued our journey, Jesus led me to a research laboratory where scientists were working with advanced artificial intelligences. These AI assistants were integrated into every aspect of daily life, making life more convenient and safe. "But there is a subtle danger here," Jesus warned me. "Artificial intelligence can be a great blessing if used correctly, but it can also become a threat if misused. Humanity must learn to use this technology wisely and responsibly. Ethics must be at the heart of every technological development." I then saw a vision of a world where AI was used irresponsibly. Invasive surveillance systems, crucial decisions left to machines without compassion, and a society divided between those who control technology and those who are controlled by it. It was a dystopian future, a warning of what could happen if we are not careful. These visions left me with a profound sense of responsibility. Jesus looked at me with love and seriousness. John, now you know what is possible. You must return and do your part to ensure that humanity chooses the right path. Every small gesture counts, and you can make a difference. I woke up in the hospital, confused and with doctors amazed at my rapid recovery. Jesus' words echoed in my mind, giving me a new purpose. Weeks later, sitting in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in golden hues, I reflected on how much my life had changed. Jesus' visions had taught me that beyond technology and progress, the true essence of life lies in the present moment, in love, and in connection with others. Since that day, I have learned to enjoy every moment, to value the little things I once took for granted. Morning coffees with my wife, the laughter of my children, the scent of flowers in the garden, all these things had become precious treasures. I started spending more time with my family, friends, and myself, rediscovering the beauty of simplicity and presence. Every day is a gift, and every smile, hug, and act of kindness counts more than any technological advancement. I found my peace and joy in human relationships and in living with gratitude and awareness. The future is important, but it is the present that builds the foundation for what is to come. In this new perspective, I discovered that true happiness does not come from what we own or achieve, but from how we live and love each day. And in this, I found my peace, my joy, and the true meaning of my existence. John Harris's story has ended, and it was truly an extraordinary journey, wasn't it? Think of all the incredible visions he had and how deeply they changed him. If you listen to this story all the way through, comment with an amen to let me know, and I will be truly grateful. Thank you for being with me today. See you in the next video. A hug from Charlotte.